Very nice. Excellent.
So, am I allowed to kick off, sir?
Very nice. So until is it 4 o'clock already? So I
Sir,
think whenever you wish.
can I start?
Sure.
Okay, great, sir. So, a very good afternoon to all of you, and I welcome you to today's session on C-suite leaders and emerging challenges. This is again another effort in our as part of our initiative within Independent Directors Data Bank, and it is again a step for helping you all to engage with the data bank more, discussing pertinent issues of interest, which not only helps us to understand the subject from the experts, but also provide us an opportunity to interact and seek the responses to the queries we have in mind. Leadership is a buzzword, and as we understand, there are different and difficult times which require a differentiator approach, a different approach to leadership at the C-suite level. We also understand that on the one hand, board leadership is important, to which we all contribute as independent directors. C-suite also contributes to a larger extent and supports the board in giving right direction and oversight to the company. Various officers of C-suite level leading the respective verticals act as a catalyst between the execution as well as the strategy, and the strategy comes out from the board. Today, in the event, I would like to welcome Mr. Dhanendra Kumar, Senior IAS Officer of 1968 Haryana cadre, who is going to moderate the session. And we have with us in our initiative to bring the industry closer to the independent directors and the capacity building interventions, Mr. Munindra Anand and Mr. Sanjay Kapoor from Center for Creative Leadership and from Russell Reynolds, respectively. If I introduce you with the panelists today, as I've mentioned, Mr. Kumar is a senior IS officer and has served senior positions in central government and state government, and also the World Bank in the capacity of India's executive director on the board, representing India, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and Bhutan. He had been Secretary to Government of India and has served across various ministries. He has also worked as India's resident director in London of India Investment Centre from 83 to 86 under Ministry of Finance to promote investments and joint ventures from UK and Europe to India. He had been Principal Secretary to the Chief Minister Haryana, Chairman Haryana State Industrial Development Corporation, and has to his credit the industrial development which we see in Haryana, especially having Udyog Vihar, Manesar Industrial Zone in focus. He is currently the founding chairman of Competition Advisory Services LLP, a strategic consultancy firm in the competition law, having to his credit the chairmanship of Competition Commission of India, a body of Ministry of Corporate Affairs. Then if I introduce you with Mr. Munindra Anand, he's a prominent business leader, having 2 decades of experience across business consulting, HR consulting, and industry, with diverse exposures in the areas of human resources, rewards, performance management, HR transformation, talent management, leadership development, and so on. He is certified in leadership styles, inventory, caliper profile, and strategic selling skills from Miller Hyman. Prior to joining its present organization, that is Center for Creative Leadership, to which he serves as Managing Director, India and South Asia, He was director with KPMG India and has led various verticals in HR consulting. He has diverse experience of working in multiple countries to his credit. By education, he is a Commerce Honours graduate from Delhi University and an associate member of Institute of Cost and Management Accountants of India. If I introduce you all quickly with Mr. Sanjay Kapoor, Mr. Sanjay Kapoor is managing director with Russell and Renault, and he concentrates on conducting senior level executive and non-executive director searches and leadership advisory services in industrial and natural resources sector, professional services, and for private equity and pension funds. He has large Indian conglomerates as his clients, as well as the multinational corporations, and he closely works with senior business founders as a trusted advisor on leadership development and succession planning issues, one of the key issues which we struggle with. He also leads the CEO and board services practices India with Russell and Renault. In terms of education, Sanjay has bachelor's in commerce and master's in management studies from University of Mumbai. I would like to heartily welcome our panelists, and now would like to pass the mic on to the today's moderator, Mr. Dhanin Kumar. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Neeraj Gupta. I am very grateful to you for a very generous introduction. Let me also take this opportunity of welcoming my fellow co-panelists. We have a very distinguished panel with us today. And of course, the participants, whoever have found time today to participate in this event, I have a great pleasure in extending a very cordial welcome to them. Thank you so much, all of you, for joining us. The topic selected by IICA and Mr. Neeraj Gupta is extremely relevant in so much as we are passing through very turbulent times. Soon after the COVID-19, as the economy is now gearing up for a quick turnaround, all of us in our respective corporates have a tremendous responsibility to give it a practical shape. We have passed through an era where we have seen unprecedented meltdown in our economy, and things have gone entirely topsy-turvy. Nobody could have foreseen what happened. So we have to take a closer look at it, but it goes to the India's economy, its strength and resilience, that we have not only survived, but we are one of the few economies in the world who are now poised for a very sharp growth. In fact, the share market gave a very big booming welcome to India's growth when it just scaled 50,000 Sensex. And if you look at the growth in the India's stock market, then just before the COVID and soon after COVID yesterday, it has almost doubled. So it is the resilience of Indian economy, its entrepreneurs and all that which goes with it. But now it's a huge challenge for us to make sure that the gains now after the COVID is likely to be over soon, they are sustained. And now we are, as a country, gearing ourselves for a very quick, scheduled vaccination campaign. It has started very well, and hopefully in the next few months, most of the country would be covered. All of us would be covered, hopefully. So we must see what are the key challenges which are emerging before us and what can we do about it. The topic in particular has a great relevance for the board members because the C-suite personnel of corporates, C-suite, as we all know, stands for like CEO, CFO, CTO. So these people, they are the verticals. They are the key people who are heading or spearheading the growth of the company. If we look at their role, or in fact, everybody's role at this moment, corporates, they have a responsibility to the company. I mean, the board of directors is also the C-suite managers to the company and to the other stakeholders, which would include the shareholders, the employees, and the environment, the people around that. They have their expectations in terms of the linkages which a company has evolved with the habitat or with the neighborhood. I'm reminded of the fact that when I was India's executive director on the World Bank board, which Mr. Neeraj Gupta just now alluded to, whenever there was any proposal or a project prepared, one always used to analyze the linkages with the community, with the neighborhood, with the other stakeholders, because in order for the project or for any change to be sustainable and resilient, it is important that there is a sense of ownership with each one of them. So coming back to our C-suite leaders, we have to develop in them the qualities of leadership which would be in good stead to them at this moment. And the board of directors and the directors who are present here, they have a special responsibility in that sense. The C-suite leaders, and when we talk of the leadership is something which has been defined in a number of ways, but one has to demonstrate by doing oneself, one has to set an example to one's colleagues, one's peers, the D-level people there in the corporate and others. So they would look at the board of directors, and the board of directors also have a special responsibility to towards the development of leadership among the C-suite leaders. The leadership would also include preparing themselves to face any challenges which are now emerging, challenges of technological disruptions, challenges of supply disruptions, and challenges of HR attrition. There would be possibilities that some employees might have left or might have shifted elsewhere. There are also occasions when there have been unfortunate events during the COVID. Somebody caught COVID and there have been a sudden demise or some such thing, and this leaves everybody depressed. So there should also be a succession planning in the normal course and the emergencies and so on, so that the work doesn't stop. But in the leadership development, one has also to see the morale of the people, and at times one has to see how best one can prepare them for various exigencies. And by the way, today is called the World Life Day, or a day when people celebrate it with their children and grandchildren. So the families and the lives, they are considered to be very important for emotional stability and so on. So at times the leadership development should also include how to build up on these. I remember that a few corporates, they celebrate one day or some such thing. Then they allow the employees to even bring their families there, or the children, grandchildren, wives, and so on, so they can come to their workstations and see what they are doing. So idea is to integrate ownership and fellowship at times. There are also various other ways by which corporates develop bonding among the employees. So there are various elements to leadership development, and we can talk more about it during the course of our subsequent discussion. We have with us two very prominent and experienced panelists, and we are fortunate to have them with us. And maybe they can elaborate on some of these thoughts and what they would like to say more about some of these issues. So, without much further ado, if I could invite Mr. Muneen Anand first on what he would like to share with us on this subject. What are his key takeaways on leadership, and does he feel that we can do in this regard? So thank you very much for your attention, and over to you, Mr. Muneen Anand.
Absolutely, sir. Thank you so much for the kind introduction and also helping set the context. As I was thinking about the session and preparing for the session, one picture was constantly coming to me, and I'll share that with you. It was a picture of a man riding a wave. So in the middle of the sea, a person riding a wave, that was a picture that was constantly coming to me. And I'll tell you why in a minute. We're actually all trying to outguess the future. I'm sure you'll agree with me when I say that. And when I come back to my point of a man riding a wave, what are the few options that he has? You know, he's riding a wave, he can ride it well, he can fall down, he's in the middle of the sea, he will have to get up again ride the wave, fall down, get up again. So that's exactly what the C-suite leaders are actually facing today. And again, borrowing from you, sir, what you just said, these definitely are unprecedented times where we have issues related to people situations, economic situation that you shared with us, and also business challenges. All of these unprecedented times that I shared lead to uncertainty and constant stress. So the point that I like to highlight is this is not the situation, the unprecedented time, the different and difficult times that we are facing today are not new to us. What I'd like you to do is jog your memory to the past 20 years that we've had. You know, we've faced the financial crisis. We've had SARS and hit us some point or the other, impact us. So if you look at it on an average, every 4 to 5 years, as leaders, we are poised with different challenges that come to us. So this is not something new, and the muscle of leadership that sir just alluded to is something that we need to be exercising every now and then, and that's something that will only get us to be successful. And also basis research, it's very evident that leaders respond at two levels: external organizational leadership and also internal personal leadership, or again borrowing from sir, personal resilience is what we have. These two models actually revolve around 3 stages and 7 steps, and I can share those details with you. At an organizational level, leaders must start by orienting and sense making the information that is trickling in. Because when we are in a situation of crisis, there is a lot of information coming in from many directions. Prioritize an action step, strategize to build scenarios, and finally executing in a humane manner. I think that's the most important point here. Whatever execution we as leaders do at the C-suite level needs to be in a humane manner. 2 aspects of the business that I like to highlight. One is processes, the other is people. When we look at processes and people, there needs to be a clear distinction between what we manage and what we lead. Many a times, at the times like crisis, which are different and difficult times, we start leading processes and managing people. It should be the other way around. Leaders must also reframe, collaborate, and pivot to exploit new opportunities in crisis that come forward. And just like sir mentioned about the stock exchange going twice from when COVID started to now, there are enough and more organizations that have taken advantage and have found opportunities in the crisis that we're talking about. At a personal leadership level, leaders must reflect their values, gain strength from previous crucible experiences they may have had, have experienced, connect with key stakeholders authentically, make most of trust capital. And again, I want to double click on trust capital because in these different times, trust becomes the currency that goes around. Recharge their batteries and pump up resilience. Key learning is that crisis leadership is as much as about helping the organization, businesses, team deal with situation as it is about building internal resilience. And with that, I'll pause there, sir, to take the discussion forward.
Thank you, Muningji. Very, very relevant observations which you made about resilience and about building it up and the ways in which that can be done. We'll come back to you after a while. In the meanwhile, can I request our next panelist, Mr. Sanjay Kapoor, to share his thoughts on this subject?
Surely, sir. Thank you, Mr. Kumar, and for your opening remarks as well as Muninder. One of the basic objectives of the board is to ensure that there is a high quality succession plan in the company. And that high quality succession plan is all about empowering executives, building executives for all the challenges that is really the core of what a board is supposed to do. Of course, there's the NRC to execute it, but the core of what a board is supposed to do is ensure succession planning in the company. Otherwise, the company is a very, very inanimate object. It is just an incorporation certificate. It's people who bring the energy and the differentiate. Now, obviously, we can talk about competencies, we can talk about experience. What I would like to touch on today, based on our research as a leadership advisory firm, is some of the ecosystem challenges that most leaders are facing. Let me try and share a screen with you, if I can. I'm just trying to see where is the document. Give me one second.
Sanjay, it's next to the stop video, the cross sign.
Which one? Sorry.
Next to the cross sign, you'll find the share option.
No, I've seen the share option. I'm just waiting to find the right file.
Okay.
Because I would want that there could be a challenge with sharing. I'm actually facing a bit of a challenge with the sharing. My apologies. I'm not able to share the document. But what I would like to highlight is there are 3-4 things that are happening in the ecosystem today. One thing that is hitting all our executives is what is happening in the broader disruptive world in their businesses. Every business across the industries that we operate in is getting disrupted in one form or the other. So just imagine you are an executive in a company. Most of your time goes in delivering your objectives well. There is very limited time that is there to address external factors that are more strategic in nature. So one is this whole disruption that is coming at us as executives all the time, and it's only increasing. The other piece is all around social media. You can't imagine the impact of social media on executives on a day-to-day basis. There is just too much happening. A small piece of news is flashed all over, and you got to be protecting your reputation as a corporation, as an individual. On top of that, it's a very, very distracting element. It opens up competitive platforms that didn't exist before. So that too is something that most senior executives are grappling with. The large amount of social media is impacting them. The third piece is this whole societal churn that is happening today, that we see all around us, whether it is Black Lives Matter, whether it is what we are seeing on the streets today by the farmers, or what we are seeing all across different countries. There is a lot of upheaval that is happening, and that upheaval is impacting business. So how do you, in this kind of an environment, devote enough time as directors to see whether your senior leaders and executives are finding the time, finding the ability, finding the training to enhance their skills to deal with all these dimensions. So all these dimensions are coming at us very fast. I completely agree with Neeraj, with Mr. Munindra when he says, we've gone through multiple crises over the years and human beings have emerged stronger. And that's what is driving all of us. But I think there are too many forces that are coming to play very, very closely with each other today that executives are faced with. And therefore, it becomes very important for a board to constantly ask the CEO, the CHRO about how executives are being geared to deal with. And these challenges will continue to remain out of our control. So
Yeah.
the more we can devote to enhancing the skills of our executives, giving them exposure, small things. Today you will read all over the press about ESG. Honestly, a lot of executives will understand what ESG is, but will really struggle to see the impact of their actions and how it is impacting ESG. And tomorrow, what will happen with ESG is that banks are already talking about not financing companies which are not ESG compliant. You know, all these new things are hitting us: diversity and inclusion, ESG. Now, unless we devote the time, unless we face organizations to focus on developing people on these aspects, which are all external aspects but very, very sort of important because they impact companies will struggle to do it. Companies will struggle to. I'll just pause there, and we can talk more about it as we move into the session. But those were some thoughts that come to my mind. Thank you, Mr. Kumar, and back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Kapoor, for those very wise words born out of your experience. So now maybe we can start the panel discussion in case you permit. Perhaps I could ask each one of you some questions and we can direct the discussions along those lines. Let me first of all mention that what I see, a leader is one who commands some respect, some loyalty, and he does what he expects others to do. And therefore, it is important that there is some transparency and honesty and integrity. Obviously, these go without saying. We can take some example from the cricket team, the Australian experience when this young team from India, when everybody had written them off and Australians were saying go back, and they faced all kinds of difficulties and hurdles, racial abuse. They were hit repeatedly. I mean, they were Cheteshwar Pujara, I think he took 11 very bad hits on his body. There were injuries, and then there were personal problems. Somebody's father had died in India, and there was another person, his wife had delivered a child, and many things. In such a situation, when, number of difficulties were immense, huge, they could turn around a very difficult situation, which was virtually impossible. And now everybody, the entire media, not only in Australia, but around the world, even in Pakistan, they are saying that this is the test match, historic match, which would go down in the history of entire cricket as the match, thanks to these young boys. These young boys achieved something which was unimaginable. And it was just out of their grit, determination, and never say die spirit. So what I'm trying to say that we can draw lessons. And by the way, now this is becoming a subject of study for most corporates now. How could they achieve this? What were the key attributes in the team and the players? So if we can somehow build up an esprit de corps, a spirit to fight, take up challenges, and also be loyal to each other, build up esprit de corps, the team spirit to work together. as they say in India, I mean, we are all good individually, but collectively as a team, we generally fail. So we have to enmesh those qualities with each other. So, and coming back to the COVID-19, kind of challenges and difficulties we faced, you name anything and it was there. Financial difficulties, employees work from home didn't always work, and the Wi-Fi, the broadband, the electricity, and so on, everything went topsy-turvy at times. In such a situation, what do you think, Mr. Muneen Anand? How do you feel that C-suite leaders deal with these crises, some expected, some unexpected, and prepare themselves and their organization to face those challenges? What are the critical skills which C-suite leaders develop and cultivate in order to effectively deal with such crises? So could you throw some light on these issues?
Absolutely, sir. Thank you so much. And again, once again, key words that I noted from what you said was owner's mindset, leadership of a different order and magnitude. And I'll probably cover that in the discussion. And just to address your question that you have on the C-suite leaders and what all they have to deal in terms of times of crisis. And I'm not going to sum it up by saying these are crises, only the ones that we faced in COVID-19, but all the crises that we've seen, whether it's been, the financial crisis or any other crisis that leaders and organizations face over a period of time. And again, to start with, it would be an understatement to say that leaders are stressed out and challenged. A lot of leaders are under tremendous stress since most of them are facing crisis of this proportion, impact and the duration for the first time in their careers. I mean, no one even thought that the whole world, forget a country, would be shut down for many months together. Leaders face challenges and external pressures from multiple angles, from employees under stress due to concerns about well-being. I think well-being in the COVID times especially is got amplified, to board who may have unrealistic expectations from their CEOs. So many a times the boards are demanding and will always be demanding. They have expectations from their CEOs, from customers who may have service issues due to business disruptions that occur, to regulators who may want to tighten the control on companies during uncertainty. And in some cases, even societies, and again, sir, you mentioned this in your opening remarks, even societies, when crisis directly impacts their habitats. So these are all four different dimensions that leaders are challenged with in terms of challenges. Internally, leaders may have incremental pressures due to their own insecurities. And I'll point out a few, and I'm sure these comments will resonate with you. Leaders often think, am I good enough to take my organization through this crisis? Right? Do I have it in me to take my organization forward? And I'm sure this has happened to you. This is what we call in the imposter syndrome, where you challenge yourself to see, are you good enough and are you in the right place to make things happen? This actually happens when leaders are unsure of the confidence and the support that the boards and executive teams have in them. These are tremendous pressures, and they may result in leaders feeling compelled to act, sometimes in haste, sometimes without weighing in all options, because the expectations from all sides to the leaders is to be able to find solutions. Such situations can lead to serious damage on leaders' health and well-being, especially for those who are not working on building their resilience. And when we say resilience is all fronts of physical, emotional, and mental resilience. In very simple terms, it's about recharging their batteries once in a while in this long crisis. I am sure you've heard this statement, recharge your batteries, from many people, at least during the last year that has just passed.
Yes.
True. So
That's true. Yes, Sanjay.
Can I
बताइए।
just add to that? These are wonderful points that Muninder made. And as we've spoken to board of directors, one element has emerged in hindsight that the COVID period, let's call it, say, last March to about December now, the 9-10 months, was a real time, real life leadership laboratory. All of us send people on leadership training programs, and there are, various programs and stress tests and whatnot. This was a real life leadership laboratory. And therefore, it is a great opportunity for board of directors, for independent directors to reflect on who are the people in their companies who rose to the occasion
Yeah.
and delivered what was required, and who are the people who are seeking guidance. That will help you just differentiate the leaders. Our experience in talking to boards has been that many of the people you expected to be your leaders or you thought were your leaders were not able to rise to the occasion, and many unnamed, unidentified individuals rose to the occasion. It's a great opportunity for the board to sit and reflect on some of those heroes who were never focused on and help develop them.
Well, Sanjay ji, what you said is very relevant. I'm sorry, Muninji, I'm just eating into your time, but I was tempted to make one or two observations. I'm reminded of one or two instances. Mr. Ratan Tata, whom I consider to be a great corporate leader, for instance, he just visited one of his old employees. The fact that he was not too well and at his age, but more importantly, during the attack on 29/11 on his Taj Hotel, the employees who were working there, the kind of stress, the problems they faced, some of them got killed, and then constant firing. But imagine the morale of those people and the training, and it was not out of anything. It was just out of loyalty to their job. And they stuck to their posts, and they looked after the guests. And it is again a study in Harvard. What were the factors which led them, how it was cultivated? They were also like, if not C-suite, D-suite or whatever it is, E-suite, but they were all employees and they were all leaders in their respective fields. So how was it cultivated and nurtured? So as you rightly said, COVID is one emergency, but there could be any kind of emergency. How do you develop those qualities? I mean, I'm sorry, again, a small instance I would say, I'm not saying I'm a very effective or very big leader, but I'm suddenly reminded of something. In the early stages of my IAS career, my first posting was SDM, subdivisional officer, SDM. And this was a place called Hasi in Hisar district.
Yes.
And I was camping in a village. And suddenly in the middle of the night, I was woken up and I was told that the canal has breached. I was staying in a canal rest house and water gushing in. And, we don't know what to do. I'm talking of 1970, no mobile phones, nothing. I don't know how to communicate. And the only means of communication was police wireless. So we immediately organized whatever we could do and so on. And that one night was something which I would never forget in my life. We worked hard, mobilized the entire community, got charpais, this, that, and took out the old invalid and so on through the gushing water, and then food and stuff like this. So there could be emergencies of various kinds.
Correct.
How do you work in those emergencies, and how do you encourage, inspire, and motivate your colleagues to work in those emergencies? This is what I would like to hear from you.
Absolutely, sir. And I can probably share two quotes that are coming to my mind as well as you give this example itself. Given that you were an SDM at that point in time, you didn't have to do many things that you did that night, as you called it out. This for you is what we say an owner's mindset. So there is definitely an owner's mindset, and most of the people or people in organizations in the corporate world tend to have a tenant's mindset. So I am a tenant, I am the recipient. But till the time you don't have an owner's mindset, you won't be able to accomplish what you accomplished. And if you have more and more people with the owner's mindset in the organization, it makes life much more easy, and they all feel that they're driving towards a common goal. The second phrase that comes to mind, sir, and it's emerging very clearly, and I'm going to borrow it from my global CEO. He uses this phrase called leadership is like a muscle. The more intelligently you train, the better you get.
Yes.
So it's definitely an acquired skill. It's a social process, and for you to be effective, you have to keep practicing it. And to Sanjay's point that he just made, it's absolutely true that we don't know that the next crisis is just round the corner. The COVID, as we believe with the vaccine, is going away. That's probably not true, because we had stress of COVID. Now we have the strain of COVID, which is emerging from UK, and you don't know what else is going to be happening in the future. And absolutely right, Sanjay. To your point, it was a real-time leadership laboratory in terms of what people experienced and how people came across. We've had enough and more examples. So you gave us the positive examples, and I called those examples the COVID gifts for us in 2020. But there have been enough examples where people have collapsed. Organizations are actually going, and CEOs are actually going and offering psychological help to their employees because they haven't been used to working from home, right? So multiple reasons and things that are emerging even during these times of crisis.
Thank you so much, Muneenji. Can I come to Mr. Sanjay Kapoor now and ask you a few questions, and maybe then once you have answered, I can again go back to Muneenji. Sanjay ji, I wanted to ask you, there are C-suite leaders and there are functional leaders below them. So what is the differentiator between them? How do you develop the functional leaders into C-suite leaders and so on and so forth? How do you upgrade their leadership qualities so that in times to come, they can also take over as C-suite leaders? There should be a strategy in any corporate to develop leadership and also backup plan. Suppose something happens to somebody, then somebody working in the team can take over. So how do you develop those leadership qualities? What are the differentiators, and how do you develop those functional leaders into C-suite leaders? And what competencies, in your view, should C-suite leaders build in order to enhance their effectiveness and be more meaningful to their organization, to the corporates? So these are the two questions which I thought I'll ask you, if you can throw some light on these.
Surely, sir, surely. Let me sort of address it from a very back to basics perspective. A CXO or a C-suite leader is responsible for the success of their function. A functional leader is responsible. Below them, people are responsible for their own success. Now, if I am a C-suite leader, I will never be successful unless my team is successful.
Correct.
So suddenly my success is an aggregation of my team's success. And that is the critical differentiator that takes you into the C-suite. You can have people who've done very well, let's take the sales function. People who've done very well in the sales function are normally disruptive in the market. They keep on disrupting the market and they gain. But the minute they become the chief sales officer, they have to have a much more pragmatic view of how to work. It's no longer about me and building out a market presence. It is about how does my team deliver. And that is the trick to developing leaders. How do you give opportunities? Now, I know companies which organize themselves into smaller P&Ls only so that they can have people taking on smaller responsibilities for a broader number of people and for a P&L before they move into the C-suite. So very often what we believe as a firm and our research shows is that your strategy has to reflect in the structure. And once it reflects in the structure, it throws up enough opportunities for people to get developed. And that is a constant kind of a flow then of people. Why do people say Unilever is a CEO factory? There is a reason for it, because they develop leaders very effectively, and many of them become leaders within the Unilever world globally, and many of them go out and serve other companies at large. Same is the case with Citibank in the banking world. And so there are reasons why these are done, or why these sayings are there, because people are developed in a structure. The structure of the organization allows that development. Very often we forget structure as a concept itself. We just talk about people. So that is one. I will share with you a Unilever example. Yesterday, a lot of you might have read in the Economic Times how Unilever was talking about developing people, inclusion, raising the standards of living of their employees and their suppliers' employees, building a much more inclusive culture and whatnot. Now, one of the things that Unilever does is that because startups and e-commerce kind of activities have just got blown out of the society in terms of volume, they actually now encourage their executives to take a break and get seconded to start. Just imagine they are willing to release their executives to go and work in a startup for 6 months to 2 years and come back and maintain their seniority, because they believe going and working in a different ecosystem, the owner's mindset that was just mentioned by Muninder, is what they will develop by going and working in a startup. And just imagine the disruptive mindset that they will obtain in the startup and come back to a big stable ship like Unilever. What is happening today as far as leadership development is concerned, you got to think outside the box, because the world has become disruptive. Your own leadership development techniques for your people have to become disruptive. Unilever is possibly the only company I know, I'm sure there are many other companies, where all senior executives beyond a certain level are encouraged to take a board seat outside. So that apart from running their day job, they also serve on a board as a non-executive director, obviously non-competing board, and learn the skills of how to run a different business. So there are these very enhanced ways to do it. The basic ways are around the structure itself, but then beyond reaching a CXO level, how do you develop people further is by these experiences that I was talking about.
I fully agree with you about Unilever. I am also familiar with their corporate culture a little bit. In fact, when I was posted in London, as Neeraj just mentioned, in 83 to 86, I had occasion of some interaction with their headquarters there in London. They have a culture, corporate culture of that kind, and we are very fortunate that right now the HUL has built up upon that culture, and the present CMD there, Mr. Kapoor, is ranked as number one corporate leader in that sense. In fact, in one of the recent this thing, he was ranked as number one. ITC was number two chairman, and the third was the Bennett Coleman. But anyways, not going into that. But the point which you made is extremely relevant. That what Muninji mentioned about the owner mindset is extremely important and relevant. And what you said about building up the leadership in their employees to facilitate them to work either in the startups or in the board seats is extremely important. One thing which suddenly came to my mind was that we in India are a bit fortunate to have in our systems, in our family culture, strong family bondage. So we don't have those kind of uncertainties about divorces and so on that somebody is worried about whether it's... I remember again in 1983 January when I went to London on my posting, and I landed up there at Heathrow and I was received and so on. So some of my friends who had come to receive me, they said in England, they said that there are three things which are uncertain. One is the weather. You never know whether it is sunny or going to be in a few minutes, might rain and so on. The other is job. You might lose your job any minute. You suddenly go to your office, you may be given a pink slip. And the third is once you come back home, you don't know whether your wife would be there to receive you or greet you, and she might have left you. So in India, fortunately, we have at least the family side is taken care of. very well. There are a number of organizations I know who have given reasonable work security to their employees. In fact, recently I was talking to somebody, HR head, in one of the country's biggest law firm, Khetan and Company, and they have more than 700 advocates. And during the entire pandemic, they did not retrench even one. And even though, the hardship, everybody would, generally the seniors, they would take it 20%. The middle and junior level, no cut, no retrenchment, nothing at all. And naturally, it builds a lot of loyalty and trust. And now they've gone back to their original stuff. So the point I'm trying to make is that you have to also build loyalty. And loyalty, morale, those things are also equally important. And the C-suite leaders must have it and must regenerate down the line. Would you like to throw some light on this? Any comment on this, Mr. Sanjay Kapoor?
So, sir, I think today the way the corporate world is structured is that there is a lot of, and here we're talking about the millennial and the younger generation. There is a lot of focus on continuous development. People at that age level today, our research shows us, are more focused on, am I developing? Am I building skills?
Yeah.
Because they have grown with disruption around them, and they realize that in 5 years' time their skill set might not be useful or might become redundant. So a lot of the loyalty today is built around continuous development of, as opposed to being loyal to families. That still exists in pocket. But my view is a lot of it is built around developing, am I getting enough opportunity to develop myself? If I am not getting enough opportunity to develop myself in this organization, if I find somewhere else, I'm getting a better opportunity to grow and develop, I'll move on. So the loyalty factor is related to development as opposed to family linkages, so to speak.
And if I can add, sir, if I can add to what Sanjay just mentioned, when we look at research, and this is going back 50 years of research, because that is our legacy of having done 50 years of research on leadership development, there are 4 fundamental competencies that emerge more so during these times, and rather, I'll probably take back what I said, applicable during any time, I would say, not just the difficult or different times. The 4 competencies are that of self-awareness, learning agility, influence, and communication. And even if you were to play this in a normal scenario, which is pre-COVID or during COVID, you will find that each one of us discovered and uncovered a different version of us. And that was self-awareness. And to Sanjay's point that he made, many leaders emerged during those crises were not even in the radar to say they'll be able to overcome these crises. So that's one. Learning agility, and I'm sure everyone on the call will agree, the fact that the fact is that the technology enhancement that's happened over the past 10 months is equal to technology enhancement that happened over the past 10 years, I would say. Number of people using Wi-Fi, schools going online, offices going online, so on and so forth. And that's something that when you speak to the C-suite leaders, this is something that they acknowledge. Whoever thought that, you will order food, food we've been ordering, clothes we've been ordering, but groceries online, medicines online, shopping online. Everyone is moved. So those were a few of my observations on the competency point that you had. Again, I'll repeat it for the benefit of everyone. Self-awareness, learning agility, which is linked to technology and any other learning needs that people may have. Influence. How else are we able to influence upwards, downwards, and sideways leadership? And how well, as leaders, more so at the C-suite level, are we able to communicate with people around? And there's a reason, sir, why these 4 competencies are called the fundamental 4. The simple answer is because these are the only 4 competencies that you cannot delegate to someone. You have to own them yourself. And hence they become the fundamental 4 competencies.
No, thank you, Mr. Munindranand. I think you wanted to say something, Sanjay ji?
No. I was just saying true. How true?
Okay, very true. So coming back to you, Muninji, can I ask you one or two questions here?
Absolutely, sir.
One is this that for a C-suite leader who is in charge of a vertical and in charge of a number of important things. Now, how does he inculcate and develop his abilities to anticipate the disruptive changes which could happen? Like, for example, in this case, it happened. Disruptive changes could also happen by way of technological changes, could also happen due to regulatory changes. So how does he anticipate any disruptive changes which could impact the functioning of his vertical within the corporate? Could you throw some light?
Absolutely, sir. So again, I'll probably double click on what I just said, sir. And this is leading me to think what could be the critical skills that the leader needs to have, and have and also cultivate, I guess, to deal effectively with crisis or any situation for that matter. And again, going back, and I don't know, it's by accident that again these are, I would say, there are 4 broad clusters of capabilities leaders need to thrive in, especially in terms of crisis. Leaders need to be self-aware of own values and strengths. I think that's the first cluster. More so because as a leader, especially in the C-suite level, you need to know what your trigger points are. You need to know what your tipping points are. You also need to know what drives you and how you strive. The second is displaying trust and being trustworthy. Both equally important, and I say it with equal passion to say displaying trust and being trustworthy, again for a C-suite leader, built on humility, authenticity, empathizing with people, being vulnerable. And so the Mr. Ratan Tata's example that you just gave, it's again being an authentic leader more than anything else. And again, in terms of crisis, I think what gets played up is being vulnerable is important for leaders. The second is in times of crisis, leaders need to have a growth mindset. And again, moving away from fixed mindset to a growth mindset, purely because they may have to take decisions with less information, much faster than normal. And again, the example that you gave when you were the SDM, sir, quite a few decisions on the spot that impact not just their own lives, but also others. Ability of a leader to learn quickly, irrespective of their age or level in the organization, being innovative and having a digital mindset. I think, sir, when you started, you did talk about leaders need to have a digital mindset, and this is getting played up again as point number or the third cluster. And the fourth cluster for me would be ability to handle adversity, referred to as adversely handling capability, that is highlighted by being calm, resilient, adaptable, and decisive. Leaders who display these 4 capabilities are likely to be more successful than others in a normal scenario as well as in a crisis situation.
Very relevant. We'll come back to you again. Mr. Sanjay Kapoor, can I ask you one or two questions here? One is that are the leaders industry agnostic in the sense that somebody is working in a particular industry today, but tomorrow there could be a different kind of industry where he goes, but the leadership qualities and attributes are the same. So can it be, would you mean to say that it would be industry agnostic as far as the leadership quality is concerned? Another point I wanted to ask you that what is the role of diversity in leadership? What do you feel about that? I mean, in the case of Tata's this Taj 2911, for example, it was said in one of these studies that it was the diversity which played a major role. But anyway, I don't want to relate it to that. But generally speaking, what do you think is the role of diversity in the building up of this leadership?
Sure, sir. Sure. To address the first part of your question, leadership qualities are similar, very broadly for leaders, like just what mentioned by Mulin. There is a core set of competencies that leaders develop. And these core set of competencies will get you into the C. Now, going beyond that and preparing yourself for the future is a different thing. And keeping an eye on what are the future competencies that we build is an ongoing thing. So broadly, leaders should be able to be industry agnostic. Obviously, a lot of industries are very specialized. Now, you cannot really get an oil and gas CEO to come and run a bank, for example. So those competencies are common between somebody running an oil and gas business and a bank. The leadership competencies will remain the same, but the experience that they might require to execute their job will. But there are many other support functions, so to say, finance, CHRO, chief digital officer. Now, these kind of roles can work across industry. So the experience is applicable across industry, and of course, they've developed the competency framework to reach a certain level at a PXO level. So that is how we look at it. There are clients who will insist on having industry experience. We go with that. But broadly, there are many functions today where you don't need that competency framework. Where you only need the competency framework, you don't really need the industry experience, is our view. In terms of the second point you made, a corporation or a board of directors finally has to reflect a societal need. Because unless you are serving the society, you are not a sustainable company, you're not a sustainable organization, you'll die out. And if your society is made up of folks who are diverse, then as a leadership team, as a board of directors, you have to reflect the diversity in your thinking. Because if you don't do that, you will not serve the community well. You will be then liked by parts of the community, you won't be liked by parts of the community, and that's not your purpose in life. Your purpose in life is to meet a societal need for you to be successful. And if you're meeting a societal need, your leadership has to reflect what the society is also. And that is what drives diversity, according to me. But the bigger, and there's been a lot of discussion around diversity. I'm sure a lot of our participants today face it every day in the workplace when they attend board meetings. There are discussions on diversity and whatnot. But the bigger piece that is now being addressed is inclusion. And that is the piece that needs to be fixed beyond diversity. You can hire diverse people, you can hire diverse resources, but if you don't let them become a part of the decision-making process, it doesn't get you anywhere. What inclusion to the corporation of that diverse leadership having a say in the corporation is very, very important. So I believe if you want to serve societal needs, you have to reflect that diversity. Also, a study that we did very interestingly, and it is linked to diversity, so I'll highlight it, and I hope I can pick out that slide to show everything. We did a study of executives across the globe, and we tried to see how are those executives' competencies, behaviors as a society. So North America, Europe, Asia, and you see there's a lot of divergence between leaders in these markets. So if you're a global corporation, it will impact you as to how important diversity can be for you if you're serving a global society. Give me 1 second. I'll just make another attempt at sharing. I think I might be able now. Tinkering with this. I hope you all can see the slide. Can you all see the slide?
Yes.
Great. So if you see this is a study we had done, our research. If you see the kind of competencies that exist, there's a whole diversity of competencies. And if you say Asia Pacific leaders, a lot of us will identify with this. There's value innovation. We are very, 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 very frugal societies in Asia compared to the rich societies of the West. So our innovation is also linked to value, creativity. We always focus on risk mitigation. These are poor economies which are coming back into play. There's a lack of emotional volatility. The kind of understanding and inclusion you will find in Asian societies is way beyond what you'll find in some of the Western societies. The style is much more restrained and modest. You compare that with something very, very different, like our North America. Most executives there enjoy finance-related activities. They prefer customer-centric environments. So all you will see, they want to go global. They want to capture customers all over the world. The whole mindset is very, very different. The feedback mindset is very candid and open. There's strong interpersonal sensitivity. Whereas, and so there is this need to sort of build larger teams, global teams. We will hesitate. We will be much more constrained and conservative in our approach. So, if you want to be a global corporation serving the global society, you can just from this chart see how important diversity will be in your leadership team.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you will address things wrong.
Yes. No, that's very important. When you're talking of diversity, Mr. Sanjay Kapoor, would you like to also comment upon the gender diversity and sensitivity to this subject?
So, the fact is that gender diversity is one of the major themes that has caught attention of corporations, government, everybody in India. Because I think as a society, we have a lot more diversity than other societies. So gender diversity is where we were missing. We were not up the curve. I see a lot of our corporations. Today, I can't do an executive search without having, for a good quality company, without having lady candidates in the middle. So I think there is a lot of push. There's a lot of push from corporates to bring in gender diverse talent onto the board, whether it is the board or leadership. Number two, the great news is companies are becoming a lot more flexible to suit the workflow around the personal needs of the woman candidate. Because, there are personal needs that the woman candidate has to serve based on societal needs in India, based on biological needs and other things. So the fact remains that companies are coming up that curve very fast. And that is the most wonderful part of our movement in the last 2, 3, 4 years. I think there's a lot of other inclusion that happened in India. All our states are different. If you're a national company, you are actually a representative of a very inclusive society. But this is something that companies are working on aggressively, and which is great news at the board level as well as executive and even lower level.
Thank you. I think we have time for just one round of questions to both of you. And if I could, Muninji, come back to you.
Yes, sir.
Ask you a question. There are a number of regulations which impact the functioning of any such corporate. And sometimes it is the responsibility of the C-suite leader concerned. For instance, I can tell you, when I was chairman of the Competition Commission of India, one of the matters which we used to always underline and highlight for the corporates was to conduct for their employees sensitization and training programs for compliance of competition law. Similarly, there could be a number of other laws and regulations, because if there is any deviation and malfeasance on any of the violations in those acts or legislations, the entire corporate, the company, the board of directors becomes responsible under the law. And therefore, it becomes important for the C-suite leader to be very conscious and sensitive towards the various laws and regulations which are applicable to the concerned corporate under his charge in the subject. And he should possibly take measures for risk proofing and sensitizing his colleagues and the corporate in that sphere. So what do you feel about that? What should be his role on that?
So absolutely, sir. I think this is again, given the experience of working with leaders at that level, his role is about transparent and authentic communication with all stakeholders, I would say. So again, when I say stakeholders, there are employees, there are stockholders there's people who have stocks with them, and also with their peers. So it becomes important to kind of have authentic communication with them. And when you're communicating, I think what needs to stand out is two things, two aspects of communication. One is listening to understand. So our leaders at that level listening to understand. And when I say there could be multiple aspects of what is being said, one is listening for facts, feelings, or data. The second piece is our leaders at that level asking powerful and relevant questions. So those two elements would kind of play up in making what you said a challenge, a less of a challenge for the organization and also for the leader himself or herself.
Mr. Sanjay Kapoor, would you like to put up any comment on this or any other matter?
So, sir, if I understood your question right, you're saying how does the organization or the leader de-risk the rest of the organization? Was that? I mean, I didn't get.
No, my point was that the function of the C-suite leaders should also be risk-proofing their organization in respect of the various regulations or legislations which impact their functioning, the corporate. And he should be able to conduct training of the people below him, the D level and the E level and so on. So what do you feel should be the role of the C-suite leader in terms of the leadership on this aspect?
Surely, sir, understood. Sir, my view is slightly contrarian to that. I think this is the board's responsibility. Corporate culture has to be driven by the board. The board has to be sensitive to what is happening in terms of corporate culture. If you are attending board meetings regularly, you know the underlying corporate culture. If you don't know, you can be talking to one level below, N-1, N-2 directly and because unless the board drives a high quality corporate culture, what you're talking about will happen all the time. Shortcut, extra sales booked, all the frauds that we hear about. Why do some companies end up becoming victims of frauds while others do not? Because of corporate culture. And I think that actually is a responsibility of the board to drive a high quality corporate culture from the top down and not compromise, irrespective of the.
No, that point I absolutely agree with you. But there are now laws and regulations about the whistleblowers, and there are people within the teams who at times are whistleblowing and so on. And there it becomes possibly the role of the C-suite leader also to make sure that people within the vertical or within the setup are adequately sensitized. Don't you feel so?
No, absolutely, sir. What I'm saying is, if it comes top down from the board, it gets disseminated for sure. I couldn't agree with you more. I'm not saying that I'm discounting the C-suite's responsibility on that. What I'm saying is, I think the board is equally responsible.
That is true.
Drive the culture piece.
That is true. Now, before we wind up the panel discussion and invite questions, if any, I'll give you one last round in case you would like to add anything from your side on the issues that we have discussed or anything else for a couple of minutes. Would you like to throw any comment? Muniji, first of all, you. Would you like to say anything else? Yeah.
So I think we've covered it all, but again, to sum it up, just to sum it up in terms of what it's going to take for leaders in times to come to be successful is at least starting with this year, we will see volatility, complexity, ambiguity multiplied by 10 for leaders at the C-suite level. Leaders would need to deal with paradoxes often accompanied by these crises. Lives and livelihoods both, top line and bottom line both. Sometimes these paradoxes would throw curveballs, so leaders would need to get better at dealing with these paradoxes, is what I think. And last but not the least, and I think most important for all of us, and I think something that we need to be talking about even more, is ability for leaders to be resilient, which is about burning bright rather than burning out. And that should be the mantra for us, all of us, I would say, as we start this year. I'll probably conclude with that, sir. So my last line is burn bright rather than burn out.
Very well said. Well said, Muninder. I think we've lost Mr. Dharmendra Kumar.
Yeah.
Shall I just finish my comments?
Sure,
Now,
sure.
Since I've discovered that I can now share slides, if you don't mind, I'll just conclude with a slide that I would very much like to share. Inshallah, it should work this time. Yeah. So, I just carrying on from the point that Muninder made, we see these as the emerging competencies that leaders need to focus on. I hope you guys can see the slides.
We can see the slide, yeah.
Yeah, we believe that the core competencies that people need to work on in the 20s are the following. The disruptor that they're facing is globalization, and what will be needed is a lot of agility around leadership. The other disruptor people are facing is forced digital acceleration, innovation. Without innovation, most of us will die, including our business or anyone's business. Social awakening, it is happening at such a rapid pace, it's unbelievable. And the number of people that get collected together is just crazy. So all of us have to get sensitized to inclusion in a very, very big way, very, very big way. And people need to be trained or, need to be given the opportunity to bring that across. And finally, sustainability. There is so much action happening on the environment. There's so much activism happening that unless companies start becoming completely sustainable and every employee incorporates sustainability into their working, we don't believe companies will be able to survive. So this is the set of competencies that we believe are going to be guiding people or that we need to focus on in developing people in the 2020s.
Thank you, Sanjay.
I'll stop sharing there, and I guess we'll have to hand over to Neeraj. Neeraj? Neeraj, are you there? Because we've lost Mr. Kumar. You want to?
Yeah, I'm very much there, Sanjay. It was very nice hearing from you and the insights from what you have just shown. Mr. Kumar, I think there is some technical glitch and he's trying to re-log in. So I think now, as Mr. Kumar announced, almost we are done with the discussion on a couple of key points which the moderator has found important to be discussed. If you allow, Sanjay and Munindra, can we take up some questions from the participants? In the meantime, the moderator would also join.
Absolutely can.
Sure. So, Dr. Tara, can you help us? I think we can hear from the participants in terms of some questions rather than first going to the chat box.
Sure, sir.
So I would request participants, friends, if we can raise hand and can briefly shoot the questions and also to whom the question is addressed.
Participants can unmute themselves and ask the question accordingly.
Good evening. I'm Sadhna Rao. Can I go ahead with the question, please?
Yeah, sure, please. Sure, ma'am.
This question is from Mr. Kapoor. Good evening to you all, and good evening to Mr. Kapoor once again.
Hi. evening, Sadhana ji.
Mr. Kapoor, a little while ago, you mentioned that at the C-suite level or at the leadership level, diversity is a good thing and one need not have industry knowledge. However, unfortunately, this did not thrive in Air India. So could you please enlighten us as to what do you think could have been the reason of Air India, the situation it is in today, or what has led to its downfall?
Sorry, are you asking me what has led to the downfall of Air India?
Yeah, because at the top level, they said because a lot of people they were not from the industry who came and led the airline. From time immemorial, the people who were not from the industry. So do you think that could have probably one of the reasons, or what do you think was the reason of Air India where diversity did not help the airline at the leadership level?
Ma'am, I'm sure diversity is the key factor, but it can't be the only factor. And I'm not conversant with Air India or the aviation industry to comment, authoritatively. But from whatever we've read, there were non-qualified, like you're saying, at the helm. The government used to interfere a lot. So I'm sure there are multiple reasons that led to the downfall of the company. But I'm not the right person. So, yeah, I'm sorry.
Thank you. No problem.
I'm sorry that lights went out in my house, and coincidentally, when somebody was mentioning about burnout or something, I think Munimji, you were mentioning.
Right, sir.
Coincidentally, just at that point of time, the power went off.
I'm sorry, sir, if it was my doing and something that I said that kind of got the lights to go.
I don't know. It was just a coincidence.
Right, sir.
I
Right,
missed
sir.
that part. So please do carry on. I think we are having question answers.
That's right, sir.
So we can maybe carry on. I'm so happy that we have now, we had about 177 earlier participants, now we have 167. Anyway, so anybody else? I can't see any because it has disappeared. The chats have disappeared from my screen. So somebody maybe can take the floor and ask the question.
Yeah,
So we can have it from the directly. Yeah.
Good evening, sir. Am I audible? Mr. Kapoor, what is the full form of TFC in your slide? That is one question. And yeah, please. And
I can also see Mr. Raghav Chandra, a distinguished colleague, who is also present today. In case he's going to ask, he was chairman of the NHAI and also secretary in Government of India. If he has any questions.
So Mr. Vivek, TFC is transformational change.
thank you for a very inspiring session today to both our speakers and to the moderator. We are really honored and privileged to have had this session. And we have learned a lot, I think, one and all. My only, question that comes to my mind as an independent director is that not necessarily related to the subject today, but we as independent directors often act as agents of the state or the union of India. So I'm just wondering whether, because we are responsible for any malfeasance that happens, I'm just wondering about any thoughts you might share as to how the government of India can get involved either in the compensation or in the protection of independent directors, because sometimes a lot of detailed knowledge is not available to them, to avoid conflict of interest. Thank you.
Sanjay, would you like to take this question?
Sir, I will share with you my view as Sanjay Kapoor and not Russell Reynolds Associates. I think the government needs to remove restrictions on compensation of board of directors, because today the risk return ratio is not right in my view as an individual. And we actually have been talking to the government with other independent directors, not as Russell Reynolds Associates, on ideas on how board members can be better rewarded. But the government's point of view, I guess, Mr. Kumar, you might be in a position to explain why the government, puts these restrictions. Within your experience, you might have a better view.
No, before I give any comments, may I invite Mr. Neeraj Gupta to say something on this, because he is the one who is handling this subject inside out in the IICA. Are you there, Mr. Neeraj Gupta?
Yes, I'm very much there, sir.
Would you like to give any comments on this?
Can I have the question back again briefly? I somehow missed the last part.
Vivek ji, but would you like to repeat the question? Do you have
Vivek ji, you are on mute. Vivek ji, you are on mute. Can you please unmute yourself?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, my question is that essentially as independent directors, we are held responsible by the country for any malfeasance or wrongdoing on part of the company as a member of the board. But our compensation depends entirely on the whims and fancies of the board of directors, which is typically a family-owned company. Now, my question is, can the government of India effectively consider independent directors as officers of the state and then get involved in the compensation, or either mandating the level of compensation or in some other way to ensure some protection? Because independent directors are effectively unprotected because of this, while they are not always having access, and it's an unequal power equation between the family-owned boards and the independent director himself or herself. Thank you.
Okay, well, in this regard, sir, I would like to mention, as far as the compensation or the risks and liabilities associated with the profession is concerned, there are a couple of things which have emerged as a matter of practice. Like it is being insisted, and we always share this in terms of inputs during our sessions also, that one can insist for an the liability insurance cover while accepting the position in a board. Then as far as the humongous liabilities are concerned and no protection available, and as in recent past we have seen independent directors being prosecuted for something they were not privy to or they were not shared in terms of information. So considering this challenge, and with a plight to help independent directors for their safety and security, Ministry of Corporate Affairs to their various regional directors and ROCs issued a directive in very clear terms that until unless something substantial is found out with the act or performance of an independent director having engagement with something which is not in line with the laws, in those cases only the cases needs to be registered or this needs to be questioned, otherwise they need to be bothered about. But yes, one thing which I would like to share, having more protection on board considering the volume of liabilities on the shoulders of independent directors, there is more needs to be done, and we are also working on a policy issue providing some insurance cover or immunity to the independent directors. I'm sure in future it's going to be much more louder from the Companies Act point of view. So that's my take on it, Vivek ji.
Does it answer your question, Vivek ji?
Something.
Does it answer your question?
I think you're on mute. Vivek, you're on mute.
Except the money part.
Thank you. I just wanted to add that effectively we become agents of the state when we act as watchdogs within the board. And I think a lot more needs to be done rather than merely minimizing the liability or ensuring and so forth. So there is a lot more that needs to be done, and I hope that the IICA will take it up directly with the Ministry of Corporate Affairs. Because effectively the government has outsourced its responsibility of monitoring the boards to the independent directors. with criminal liability or civil liability, more or less, as
Yeah.
the case may be. But there is a need to also empower the independent directors in a similar manner. That's my submission, not a question. Thank you.
Just one point I would like to add, Mr. Vivek, in this case, as you are mentioning, independent directors be considered as a agent of a state. See, in case of state public sector enterprises and central public sector enterprises, there are serious engagements from PSB, Department of Public Enterprises, then also the administrative ministries, and in that case definitely independent directors represent to a larger extent the state discharging the oversight roles and responsibilities, because lots of checks and balances are put while selecting the professionals to serve in the public sector boards. But as far as you yourself has mentioned, in promoter driven companies in the boards, they are the promoters and the NRC which contributes to the selection of independent directors. So how can they be considered as agent of state? Probably I need to think more about it and require some further discussion with the experts about the possibilities. I don't have a comment as of now, but it is a considerable point, and definitely I would love to come back after some examination of this.
Thank you.
May I just give a comment? I think first of all, we are nearing the end of the given time. 5:30 we were supposed to end, but let me just add one or two comments on this. As it was just pointed out, right now the mode of appointment of independent director is such, as it was just mentioned, that he is nominated or chosen or appointed by the promoter himself. And as a result, there would be hardly any scope for such a person to be considered or construed as an agent of the state. He would not be able to represent the state there in any case. But what is happening through the IICA to empower the independent directors with their rights and duties and knowledge about company law and various factors which govern his role as independent director, I think that is something which is very relevant and very timely, I would say, in this context, because without this, there could be a situation that independent directors could have landed themselves in a situation when they were responsible. And we all know the various instances in the past. The Satyam case we know, the various other cases we know. And it would not be possible, in my view, for the state to accept this suggestion that they may be considered as agents of the state. But yes, they need to be empowered. And also, yes, there is possibly need of an oversight about the selection. So the appointment of independent directors, in one case, for example, I know that the promoter, he appointed somebody, some friend, some relation or whatever, the independent director. And after the list was exhausted, then they didn't know what to do. So he appointed his barber. His barber as and the qualification had to be written. And in the qualification, it was written personality enhancement expert. So when it's just in a lighter way. But the point is this, that the appointment of independent director is a very serious exercise where possibly some oversight or need of qualification that he's adequately suitable for this needs to be taken. And there should be some mechanism of maybe getting it approved at that stage, but making him an agent of the state possibly may be too far-fetched. So with this, I think we have come to the end of the time allocated, unless my co-panelists have anything very important to add. If nothing, then I would like to thank my co-panelists and all the participants for this event. It was a pleasure to this session, and I enjoyed each one of you. Thanks a lot indeed, and I look forward to maybe similar interaction with IICA. And in case there are any individual questions, then it could be sent to the organizers in IICA, and we'll be happy to take up those questions. Thank you once again, Neeraj. Thank you so much, Kapoorji, and thanks a lot for listening, Munirji. Very
Thanks.
happy, everyone. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Yes, I would like to extend my sincere thanks to Mr. Dhanin Kumar for moderating the session in a very interesting manner, steering us and having focus on the areas which are really relevant for our learning. Also thankful to Mr. Munindra and Mr. Sanjay for well-researched insights and the experience which they have gained while working with the industry leaders, developing leadership pipelines across the companies. I also would like to thank all the participants we were having. We touched at point of time 200. Scores are important these days. I was also keeping a track on the tally. It was good to have double century today. Final thanks goes to my team for excellent coordination, especially Dr. Tarashankar. Have a great evening and stay safe, stay healthy. Thank you to all of you.
Thank you, Neeraj.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Gupta.